the whole issue around pornography and what it does to us as Christians, what it's doing to the body of Christ in particular, which is absolutely staggering, the impact that this evil has had on the church, on the very people that God has chosen to welcome into the kingdom of heaven, and the extent to which this evil has penetrated our churches, and more importantly our families, is shocking. And I've had kind of a front row seat to a lot of that, not by intention, but sort of being drawn into it because of the work that I've done. Now today is a unique experience for me because I don't have to talk about human trafficking really. I will talk a little bit about it, but only in the context of how it relates to pornography, and hopefully we'll be able to draw some important connections there for you. Pornography is a place that in many ways intersects with so many things that we are challenged with in our families, in our church, in our day-to-day life. You can't talk about pornography without discussing male sexuality in this country. You can't talk about pornography without discussing marriage and without discussing purity and all the other things that this kind of comes around and that get drawn into this discussion. And for me, one of the really critical aspects when I started thinking about this issue, and it was difficult to really have this conversation in the beginning with a lot of people that I work with because they don't really necessarily look at it from a Christian point of view. I can't imagine another way to look at this issue. Because whenever I hear discussions, and you'll see some of the evidence today in some of the slides that I put together for us, you hear the discussions about what pornography does, the evil of pornography, and how it impacts our families, and how it impacts biochemistry, and how it impacts child rearing, and how it destroys love, and it impacts marriage, and all these other things like that. When you leave God out of that discussion, it absolutely seems to fall flat on its face. We can't have a discussion around issues having to do with purity and not talk about the moral anchor, right? We can't do that and not have some connection to talk about God, not talk about Christianity, not talk about our relationship to what it means to be a servant, to what it means to live purely on this earth, to be in this earth but not of this earth, right? And so today what I want to do is kind of walk you through a little bit about this discussion of pornography. My intention originally was to talk for maybe like about 90 minutes and then leave some time for question and answer. We're getting a little bit of a late start, so I'll probably trim that content a little bit. If you have questions during it, I want to make this as organic and natural as possible, so feel free. I'm not, if you raise your hand, I'm going to go, hey, what's going on? What do you got? And we'll kind of talk through that. So that's cool, and I am totally in favor of us doing that. So, where do we find the beginnings of pornography? One of the places that I look at where I start to examine where pornography came from is how marriage, which is previously, traditionally, was the anchor of our sexuality, right? God created sexuality to exist wrapped in the embrace of marriage, right? That's how it's portrayed in the Bible. That's how it's portrayed in our Christian understanding of it. Back in this slide here in 1893, and obviously I'm old, but I wasn't around in 1893. People back then were already starting to have this sort of image about the drudgery and the sort of oppression of marriage. And when I think about the men that I've talked to that wrestle with this issue of pornography in their day-to-day life, one of the key factors for guys that are coming at this when they're married is that connection to my marriage is kind of old and this is kind of new. And that's one of the important things. So this really isn't, that idea has anchors over 100 years ago of what marriage is and that whole relationship. And then we move ahead and we go into the 50s, and sexuality and sex was used as a tactic to pretty much sell anything. People created these ad campaigns, and they started to introduce photos of women. And when this really started to take off in ad campaigns, does anybody know where that really got its anchor? It was during World War II, and it was because they were trying to prevent GIs from getting syphilis and gonorrhea, and so they put these ads out there, and the first ads that they had portrayed women that kind of look like their mom, which is really disturbing. And so they thought, well, that's really not getting a message across. So then they put ads out there that portrayed women that had more sex appeal and were, even back in those days, were wearing less clothing and different things like that. 1973, this discussion about sexual normalcy. And I don't know if anybody here remembers when Playboy started to get a lot of press, right? What kind of man looks at Playboy? What's Playboy? Well, what's interesting about this slide for me and why I included this one is because my first exposure, and it was right around, I was born in 1962, so it was a little bit before this, it was when I was 9 years old. I remember finding a a page that somebody had torn out of a Playboy magazine, and all it showed was a woman, and there was a bicycle in front of her so that it was covering her genital region, but you could see her breasts, and that was my first exposure to pornography, and that was right around the time that Playboy was sort of engaged in this normalization of that magazine. Hey, it's not guys that have to hide this that are looking at it. It's normal men. It's men like you, men like me. And that's what this slide refers to. Then we jump ahead to 1980, and I don't remember if any of you guys remember this video when it came out. I don't have the video downloaded on here. But that's who? That's Brooke Shields, right? Brooke Shields created, the way that they use Brooke Shields, it started a new introduction of not just using sexuality to sell, but very young girls to sell sex-based marketing and things like that. And if you go on YouTube and you just put in there, you just search Brooke Shields, I think it's jeans campaign, Calvin Klein jeans campaign or something like that, 1980. You can pull up all these videos, and even now, the content, the movement, the music that's playing, the way that she's talking, her body language is all very shocking. And that was what? That was over, that was almost 40 years ago that was out there. Does anybody remember this ad campaign? Remember what this created when it came out? All the protests and all the people in the church, and there was some of the evangelical groups were speaking out against it. Is anybody confused about what's going on there? It's talking about basically it's a gang rape scenario, right? And that was a pretty well used, well distributed ad campaign that this company used when they came out with this in 2007. And it was one of the first times, not the first time ads had been using sex to sell, but one of the first times they associated violence with it, right? And look at the look on her face. That's really important to me when you look at these pictures, and one of the things that I want to draw out, and I'm going to talk about why that's so important later on, but when we look at the looks in her face, I've seen video of women being raped because I've watch the videos we've recovered off phones and things like that in real life. It doesn't look like that at all. The facial expression she's using, that looks like, hey, this is really great. I'm really going to enjoy this. Okay. 2010, Calvin Klein. Okay. Again, another demonstration. Putting the male in a position where he's taking advantage of this woman, where he's overcoming her resistance potentially. And Calvin Klein has sort of routinely pushed that envelope of sexuality in advertising. So what does that bring us to? Well, it brings us to today when everything that we know about pornography is what? Pornography is everywhere. Now that's not such a surprising factor when you look at all of how distributed sort of this obsession around pornography, obsession around sexuality is in our country. If you think about it, how long can you watch television for, even in prime time, and not see something where they're using sex to sell? Billboards, magazines, things like that. It's all around us, and all of it has some connection to or is driving us toward this idea of sexual excess. Now this graphic that I used on here is one that Pornhub, which is actually probably the biggest site right now, and it used to be YouPorn, but now it's Pornhub. Pornhub is the one that most kids are using. It also is the one that contains the largest, percentage-wise, it contains the largest groupings of underage pornography. I've had 16 cases, trafficking cases, where we've recovered videos of young women, and they're pretty non-specific. I mean, they don't say, hey, I'm 15 years old, I'm 16 years old, but they're on there. In some cases, they're in the process of actually having sex. In some cases, they're performing oral sex, those sorts of things. But Pornhub is one of those places, and I learned more about the amateur porn industry than I ever wanted to know. You guys heard the stat, I think, yesterday that like 98% of pornography is made in the United States. And the majority of it is all this amateur porn stuff that's being put out there. And amateur porn, for a long time, I think many of us kind of thought that it was this sort of, not harmless really, but it really wasn't as threatening as like the organized porn industry where there was money behind it. But if you go on some of these sites, and we do with some regularity when some, it's pretty common, a victim will tell us, hey, they took videos of me, they told me they put it on this site. I mean, one of the case studies that some of you have seen, but I'm going to show you guys again, was a woman, and she was 24, who was being forced to do porn, and they put her on xxxvideos.com, and she's the one that told us about that. And that was sort of my initiation into sort of the connection between trafficking and coercion and pornography and that sort of thing. Now here's the big problem for us. This is the big problem that we all face, not just in our families and with ourselves, but we face this when we're trying to communicate this idea of what the reality of pornography really is. And that is this idea that pornography is fun. Where do we get that idea from? Where does that come from? It comes from smiles, right? For those of you that have seen pornography and have seen pornography recently, does it look in most cases, and that I'm even including those specific that specific pornographic material that's made to look like somebody's being violated. They have a site called punishedteens.com, and it's all about people being raped, being forced to have sex against their will. And one of the videos that's on punishedteens.com is a woman. She's represented to be a high school girl, and she comes home from school after she's playing sports, and she walks into her house and says, hey mom, hey dad, I'm home. What? Nobody's here. And then she of course takes off her clothes as she's walking through the house, and she walks into her shower, and then the camera kind of foreshadows and pans back to the front door that's left unlocked, and as she gets in the shower and she's naked and she's taking a shower, and her school bag is sitting there, and her the skirt that schoolgirls are represented to wear is laying there on the bathroom floor, and then a burglar comes in. And he's a burglar, and we know he's a burglar because he's got the low watch cap on and everything, and he's using burglar tools. And what does he do? Well, he starts going through his burglary routine and stealing things, and realizes he's in the shower, and then a rape follows. During this whole process of this event, and I've investigated stranger rapes just like that, where somebody was in the shower, somebody broke in and forced them to have sex. And it's truly one of the most horrifying things that I've ever had to sit through an interview and look at the evidence, and in some cases interview the suspect and hear what they had to say. It doesn't look at all like what it looks like in that movie. And that movie sort of portrays this image that, number one, she's resisting, but she's really not resisting. And even though this wasn't really her idea, it's not all that bad, right? What's going to happen to her? And this is why pornography is so dangerous at a very foundational level, because it separates what really happens around sex, and we'll talk a little more about that, from what the fantasy about sexuality is, right? And when you start to think about this in the context of that video of a sexual assault, and I apologize to have to kind of hammer on this thing, part of my strategy in doing this kind of stuff is because I want to ruin pornography for every guy in the audience. I want to wreck it. I want to destroy it. I want to create some sort of Pavlovian response so that the next time you guys see something, it just, you sweat, whatever, you absolutely, I want to wreck it for you. So at the end of the day, if you walk out of here feeling like, yeah, pornography kind of sucks, I'll feel like we did our job here, okay? That's what my issue is. So that's what we see. Now, how different would that image be? How appealing would that representation of that event in pornography be if instead of that being an actress who's 18, 19, 20, 25 years old portraying an underage girl, what if that was really a 14-year-old girl? What if she really responded in the way that she would respond, with tears and with fighting, and that involved violence? What if it was a child? Would people still look at that the same way? Of course they wouldn't. And that's the reality. And one of the things I'm going to ask all the guys in the audience to do before you leave here is I want you to come up with some sort of a way to discuss the reality of pornography with one other person, because the truth of it is, unless we as men start talking to other guys about what this is really all about, none of it's going to change. It's not going to change in our churches. It's not going to change in our homes. It's not going to change in our schools. And so that smile is the most deceptive thing that we know about pornography. And you know where that leads? Thinking that that woman on that video that was just sexually assaulted actually kind of liked it. It leads to that strip club in downtown Minneapolis or Atlanta or Denver or wherever you are, where there's women on stage, and for some reason, and I've talked to these guys who go back and go back and go back and throw money at it, right? And throw money at this strip club and pay money to get lap dances, and they're convinced, even though they're 54-year-old men, they're convinced that that 18, 19, 20-year-old woman sitting up there really, this is really a special relationship for her. She's really getting something out of this she wants. One of the most frustrating conversations I ever had with a guy was a guy arrested. I mean, I live in Woodbury, and we recovered a 17-year-old girl out of the red, what used to be the Red Roof Inn. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's changed ownership a bunch of times. Covered a 17-year-old girl out of there, and it was one of those deals where I'm going through Backpage, and I'm like, I look at it, and I'm like, that's a kid. I know that's a kid. I didn't think she was 17. She looked like she was about 15, but we go to the door, knock on the door, opens the door. I showed her my badge, and I just said, hey, I'm Sergeant Snyder. I want to talk to you. You're not in trouble. You're not going to go to jail. And she was just really open. Yeah, I'm here. My boyfriend rented me the room. He's gone right now and stuff. Didn't want to tell me who her boyfriend was, but she admitted she was on Backpage. It wouldn't have done her any good not to because I had a picture of her face. But then I said, how long have you been here? Well, I've been here 3 days, which was true. How many guys have you seen? Well, I've probably seen about 15 guys. It's been kind of slow. So we went through, and I got access to her phone because I asked her, I said, well, how do you feel about, first of all, I said, will you talk to me about this guy that ran into the room? Well, no, that's my boyfriend. I don't want to get him in trouble. So rather than do this with her and bump up against that for 20 minutes like a lot of cops do, they sit there and they push, well, you have to tell me. And she's like, no, I don't. So I learned that lesson a long time ago. Rather than that, I opened the conversation by, okay, so these guys that came to see you, did you know any of them? Well, there's a couple of them that are my regulars, and the rest of them just responded off Backpage. What do you think about these guys? Do you like them? I mean, are you friends with them? Well, no, they're kind of disgusting. I mean, some of them are fat, and some of them are, old, and I'm like, hey, lay off the fat old guys, okay, and stuff like that. But she told me honestly that and I'd heard that obviously many times before. You can't do trafficking work and carry this illusion around that she woke up one day and went, boy, you know what's really missing in my life is having sex with a bunch of fat old guys. That's what I'm really missing. And she doesn't have that, illusion, and we shouldn't carry that either. But so anyways, when I'm talking to her about, she goes, no, these guys disgust me. And I'm like, well, you know what? Here's the deal, all right? I know you don't want to talk about your boyfriend. The problem is you're out here in this hotel room, and the reason why you're out here is because those guys are coming in, they're paying money, and they're having sex with you, and that really bothers me. It bothers me as a dad because I had a daughter her age. It bothers me as a Christian because I know that's not right. I know that's not what God wanted and what he intended sexuality to be for. Bothers me as a human being because I can't imagine us living in a world where that goes on and not having a very visceral sort of angry response to that, right? I mean, all of us, if we knew about a young woman being victimized in that way where and this woman was a runaway girl. She'd been living on her own since she was 14, so she literally lived by the money that she made for her boyfriend off a Backpage. And I said, would you help me ID these guys? Would you let me see your phone so I can read the text exchanges? And she said, sure. So we did that. We arrested all the guys. It actually wasn't 15, it was 22. And we arrested all 22 guys. One of those guys was a guy that lived about 6 blocks away from me in Woodbury. And I went into his house. He's a Navy guy, career Navy man. Retired from the Navy after however many years, and he's probably in his late 50s or whatever, and I brought a search warrant over, knocked on his door, and I go in, and he was real friendly with me and everything. I told him why I was there, and he goes, yeah, it was me. And I go, okay, well, dude, she's 17 years old. Oh, well, I didn't think so. I thought looked like she was about 20. The ad said she was 18 anyway, so I mean, he thought he was going to be okay. And then in the meantime, I'm looking, he's got, by his computer, he's got a stack, literally reams of paper of Backpage ads he's printed off, okay? So I'm talking to the guy, and he confessed, obviously, to everything. I did the whole Miranda deal and everything like that. And I said, so tell me, what, I mean, how do you respond to that? How do you feel? Now you found out she's actually a minor. She's a child, and she's a runaway girl. She's been on her own since 14, doesn't get any support from her family. I mean, how do you respond to that? And he goes, well, I kind of thought I was helping her. I thought she needed money, and, she didn't care, right? That's what that created. Because he watched porn, he went to strip clubs, and there's a direct line, folks, from pornography through the strip clubs right to Backpage, or to the internet, or to the back seat of cars, or to the corner of Bloomington Lake, or wherever it is that trafficking exists. If you think that that's disconnected from that person-to-person sexual exploitation, you're sadly mistaken. Because that, in and of itself, the nature of that is sex trafficking. The nature of what happens on that screen, that little, if you got the iPhone 7S Plus thing like I do, the little however many inches by however many inches, right? I mean, that event that unfolds on there, they're not two-dimensional creatures, are they? They're human beings that have a past, a present, a future. And all of those things we don't see. And that's the greatest delusion about pornography, right? Because we get to make it whatever we want it to look like. But what if it looked like that? What if it came with a disclaimer on there that said the girl in this video was taken against her will. This video was shot without her knowledge, when she was passed out, when she was drugged, when she didn't know that she was being filmed, by a guy that said, he loved her, by a guy that said, hey, I'm not dating anybody else, and didn't tell her what he was going to do with the video, that's a runaway kid, right, that's been abused. The same way that if we put those things on Backpage, people would never answer those ads, and if they did, they're pretty depraved, right? People wouldn't respond to that if it was on there. And so the illusion about pornography, and this becomes really, really important, because like porn, when I started doing, we did Guardian Angel for the last 3 years. We just crossed our 450th arrest. The guys in North Dakota that we've been doing it with, I've been up there a bunch of times. I can't stop them. Every day they're like, hey, we arrested 2 more in that op. We arrested 2 more. So they're just like going gangbusters. I have no idea. They're constantly calling me and telling me, and that's good. And Guardian Angel is an op that we do where we post an ad, okay, on Backpage or on Craigslist, sometimes both, sometimes Whisper, all these other sites. And then they text in, and then we pretend to be underage girls, or like I did yesterday, it was a pimp thing, right? I put an ad out there for a gangbang, and the reason why, I apologize for language, but the reason why I did that is because, does anybody remember when the Ryder Cup was here so long ago? What was that, like last fall or something like that? You know what's funny? Does anybody here play golf? Nobody plays golf in this room? Okay, a couple of people play golf. So, is there anybody else that had no idea what the Ryder Cup was? I thought the Ryder Cup was like some sort of a race. And then Shakopee PD calls me and goes, hey, we got the Ryder Cup going. Would you come down to Annapolis? And I'm like, yeah, no problem. But why to be down there? And they go, well, what do you mean? I go, there's no racetracks around you. And he thought I was kidding. He's like, yeah. I had no idea it was like this gigantic golf thing. And that was like, a week before the actual event. But here's what we did. We arrested over 20 guys on that operation. All of the guys that we arrested were from out of town. Every single one of those guys, during that text conversation, either started with or at some point said, hey, would you be willing to entertain 3 guys? Would you be willing to have sex with, and some of other words that they used, with 5 guys? And I started thinking about that, because that's really atypical for us. When we post ads out there on Backpage, it's all single guys and stuff like that. The whole idea of this, hey, let's get together and go have sex with somebody, that's really this weird sort of countercultural, just depraved, I don't know. I'm still trying to get my mind around it. So I started thinking about that, right? Because we got the Super Bowl coming up in 2018, okay? And then I'm going to take 6 months off for therapy after that. But we got the Super Bowl coming up. And I went down to Houston for theirs. And they tried to do the same thing. And I hadn't even talked to them about it. I got down there like, hey, we're going to do this gangbang ad and stuff. And I'm like, well, how are you guys going to do it? And they go, we're going to get some of these guys to show up and we're going to put undercover cops in the room. And, then we'll, all come in and all arrest them. And well, they didn't do a very good job. It didn't work. Okay, but that's all right because we learn by our failures and that's cool. I failed a bunch of times myself. So I started talking to my friends up here, Sean from St. Paul PD and Eric McFadden. He's not going to like that I called him that. Eric Fadden from Plymouth PD and Dan Wilson from Maple Grove and Jeff from Bloomington, all over the place, right? And I started saying, hey, how can we tweak this and make it work? And they're like, they got ideas and stuff like that. So we put an ad out there. My ad on Craigslist, the first day I put it up was up the first time was about 2.5 hours. And I got 222 responses. 222 responses, and they all were like, hey, can I ride this train? When's the train leave? Ha ha. Send me a naked pic. I'm going to show you a couple of the text exchanges. I've sanitized the language. So think about that for a second. That happened here. And 222 responses. Now, I couldn't identify who their friends were in most cases, except for the guys that showed up. But I could identify who, in about 85% of the cases, who those people were. And the demographic, albeit a little bit younger, okay, is still pretty similar to the guys that buy sex from adults and juveniles. And it's white, although that's changing a little bit. We're getting more of a mix there demographically. Middle to upper middle class, married, kids, good job, own their home, and have owned their home for a period of exceeding 5 years. Good income, never been arrested, never heard Miranda, never felt the cold steel of handcuffs, okay? So when I started doing Guardian Angels, and we're like, okay, I'm 14 years old, and guys are like, are you sure you're not the police? No, I'm not the police. Okay, well, I'm going to come then. And I thought that was going to be a different person, because I knew who the guy that bought sex from adult women was. It's a demographic I just told you. It's the people that go to church sometimes, and it's the people that take their kids to soccer and kiss their wives and bring them flowers on their anniversary. They're decent guys. I've known guys that got arrested on those ops. And I thought that the guys buying juvenile sex were different. Sociopaths and sex addicts. That was a real rude awakening when I realized that demographic was identical to the people buying adult sex. What do you make of that? I mean, there's not a person among us here, I know it, because I'm looking at your faces, that would think buying sex from a 14 or 15-year-old girl was okay. And I know these guys didn't think it was okay because they would say things like, are you sure you're not the police? And I know the weird sort of thing you guys, I expect you now to live with, of me posing as a 15-year-old girl, and that's sort of visual imagery you probably didn't want. But it's non-physical, okay? They never see me. We have pictures, but they're not of me. But anyway, so that person at some point decides to come to that room. Some don't. Some are like, I can't do that, that's too young. And then some get sort of self-righteous about it. You know that you're going to get hurt out here. You shouldn't be doing this. And in most cases, I let them kind of walk through that because I think rehearsal's a good thing. And maybe they're rehearsing it for themselves too, and some of that's sinking in up here. Some guys say they're not coming. An hour later, they're back texting again. Oh, please tell me you're 18. Just say it and then I'll come. Knowing that I'm 14 years old, knowing that I'm 15 years old. Games that we play with ourselves. And it's the same thing with the games we play ourselves around pornography. That's pretty self-explanatory. This idea, one of the powerful things about pornography, and the discussion, and I've had this discussion with a lot of women that are survivors of porn, not really from around here, but some, but mainly women that worked on like the coasts. I've got a very good friend, she's become a very good friend, who lives in Seattle, and started being trafficked when she was 17. Now she's 35 years old. And she was in the life for about 13 years. The first several years, it was pure trafficking. And then as she got a little bit older and sort of more elegant, she's very attractive. She got picked up by somebody that actually made porn. And then he started selling her, renting her out to very, very wealthy and exclusive buyers who would take her to like resorts when they were playing golf with a bunch of friends and businessmen and stuff like that. And her just very open discussion about what that world looked like to her. It was very normal, and these guys treated it as something that was normal. But what's our first indication of porn's not normal? What's the very first thing we know that Exactly, just bam, right off the shot there, man. We have to hide it. We know it's not normal when we have to keep it secret. That's a good indication. Because if it was normal, wouldn't matter. And unfortunately, there's a trend right now, isn't there? Where people are starting to normalize pornography. Certainly if you read the Barna study that was published last year, and you read some of that, and I'm going to talk about some of those findings, but the reality is that it's been so normalized by these companies that are making big money. But what if would it look as normal if we reflected on the percentage of people involved in pornography that are using drugs, that are wrestling with addiction, that are struggling because they don't have enough money and things like that? Would it still seem normal? Despite our best effort to keep it hidden, right, as individual users, it's everywhere. And guess what? It's not just like the different video sites and Craigslist. It has infiltrated the very places where we send our children, right? Facebook. That forced porn case that I'm going to tell you guys about was run entirely off Facebook. Entirely. The only communication was on Facebook Messenger. I had a conversation with my 17-year-old daughter last night. It wasn't one she was super happy about, and she's a good kid. She understands. She's, totally in love with the Lord. She gets it. But I had to tell her, you know what, Kayla? I don't think you're ready for social media. And it wasn't her. It was all kids. Because this is another week now where I've had another case with a 10-year-old kid whose dad found something. This is a boy. Whose dad found something on their iPod and brought it in, and sure enough, it was an older guy trying to get photos and posing as a woman, posing as an 18-year-old girl. And the guy's 72 years old from what we can tell. Okay? Facebook is probably the biggest single way that people, pornographers, traffickers, exploiters are able to target people. And I say this every time, but I'll say it again. What is it about Facebook that makes it appealing for them? In addition to the fact that, frankly, most of us don't really watch what our kids do on Facebook, right? But what's the biggest thing that appeals to them about Facebook? Sir?
Yes, it's what people will put like fake photos of themselves.
Okay, yep.
Like, say, a profile picture of a girl, you know you're a guy.
Yep.
And misrepresent yourself.
Yep, and there's a lot of that goes on catfishing, right?
Yes.
We're going to talk about catfishing. What else about Facebook is appealing to traffickers?
Also, I think people vomit on Facebook. I mean, they spill their guts.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I was looking for. I thought you were physically talking about vomiting. I'm like, I've heard everything, not that. So, but yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Yes? A lot of kids have Facebook pages. They're unprepared. They don't know what's coming. Wait, I'm going to show you guys an exchange I had with a guy named Thomas Campbell that I had a discussion with posing as a 10-year-old girl. Okay, that was really stretching it for me. But I'm multi-talented. Okay? That was divine inspiration, folks. There's no way I could have pulled that one off on my own. But we put on what's going on in our lives, right? We post how we feel because people are listening, and we've taught our kids, unfortunately, not knowingly, but we've exposed our kids to this, and they do that. Oh, nobody likes me, my parents don't like me, and stuff like that. And you know, when I've read those things, because in our household, my kids, first of all, they don't live in a democracy, they live in a dictatorship. And I wish I could tell you that I was the dictator, but actually it's my wife, and anybody that knows her knows that I'm not the dictator. I'm somewhere down the chain. I'm below servant, I think, too. But anyways, but we let our kids make decisions that they're not able to make. Is there a single person in here, and this should be a good tip-off that I don't want anybody to raise their hand, okay? Is there a single person here that feels like when they were 14, 15, 16, that they would have been able to handle all the stuff that goes on in social media today? Do they know enough about who to trust and who not to trust? When the very thing about social media is what? Get as many friends as you can. Get as many likes as you can, no matter where they come from, right? And that's what makes it so vulnerable. And then they put stuff out there like, hey, my parents don't like me, I got no friends, my boyfriend dumped me, no guy's ever going to like me, kind of, doing that sort of, hey, somebody pay attention to me. And people are paying attention, and they're ready to pay attention. Look at this. So this is from an article that was published in Forbes back in 2005, and it still kind of blows my mind when I read this article. I've read it a number of times. The internet has changed. This is a quote. This is the opening salvo on their article. The internet has changed the whole dynamic of porn, declares Tim Wildman, president of the Fundamentalist American Family Foundation, founded by his father. Blah, blah, blah. The average age of introduction to pornography is now 11 years old, and this was back in 2005. Now, in 1972, when I was 10 and I had seen pornography, that wasn't a big surprise for me. Now, they didn't have the internet back then, okay, but it was still exposure, right? So, he posts that up there, and you can tell just by sort of the nature of what he's talking about, this writer's going to challenge it. He said, just one problem. The assertion is untrue, unsupported, and likely of dubious origin, none of which has stopped porn's opponents from using it. You get the idea pretty quickly where this guy's shaking out, right? Now here's the problem with that. That fact is true. In fact, in 2005, when this was posted, and he's leaning, one of his sources, I know what he's talking about, was a study that was done back in the late 90s, and there was some question about the viability of that study and the reliability of the sample that they used that purported that it was 11 years old. The problem with attacking that is now we've proven that the average age is actually below that, below 11 years old. And the average age, and I had a kid, who, well, I still have him, now he's 15, but when he was 8 years old, he was exposed to pornography by the kid next door who was 2 years younger than him, who's over and he says, hey, Wyatt, type in BJ on Google. And Wyatt's like, why? Just type it in there. And so he typed it in there, and what comes up? Photos, right? I was very surprised, by the way, and this is from a guy that spends a lot of time on the internet. I was really surprised about a year ago when I went on to, because I go onto Google Images all the time for different things, like if I want to, make fun of my wife or something, and I have to apologize for that all the time. I don't want anybody to be misled here, okay? I do apologize when I make fun of Melanie, but when I went on there and I found out, sort of innocently, that you can Google porn, you can Google sex acts, and the images will actually come up. I would have thought Google would have shut those down, right? But they don't. It's all readily available. And that was a year ago that I found that out. Now, what do we know about porn? And I apologize for the name per the gentleman in the back about some of these sites here. 2016 alone, that site got 23 billion visits in 2016. That site, which is the most robust, 23 billion visits. That's 729 people a second, 64 million a day, the amount of people that live in the entire UK. That's a shocking amount of activity on porn sites. A staggering number of people clicking on it. Last year alone, and there's the number right there, videos were watched. That's 12.5 videos for every person on the planet. Now, I know not every person on the planet is watching 12.5 porn videos. So what does that tell you about the porn user? That tells you, when we find out what percentage of people use porn, tells you that they're doing it over and over and over and over again, right? Now, what do you call it when somebody does something over and over and over and over again? What do we call that? An addiction. That's exactly the word I was looking for. And here's why I think that word is so valuable and why we got to say it. When I started our purity group at Woodbury Community Church, I didn't use the word addiction because I was really afraid of what it was going to communicate to guys. I wanted men to come to that group, sit down in those chairs and talk about how they struggled with lust. I wanted a group of guys that could come there and sit down and go, you know what? Yesterday I passed an attractive woman on the street and I watched her as she walked by, and in my heart I was carrying lust and desire. And I know that's not right. And I want a place for them to come in and talk about, you know what, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I was on a business trip and I was there and my smartphone was there and I decided I was going to watch porn and I knew I shouldn't do it, but I got to confess that to you guys and I got to talk about it. And we've been doing that now for about a year, okay? And we've got, in that group now, we've got a number of guys that are just like me, married. They're not just like me, they're not cops and stuff, but they're people that wrestle with the same things all of us wrestle with every day. And the real reason, I'm not going to lie to you guys, the real reason why I started this, it wasn't because I felt the higher calling, well, kind of, but I spent so much time looking at images on Backpage every day, and last summer, about June, I got to the point where I could just physically no longer do it. I got a really, really bad case of like cramps in my stomach, and my wife thought, geez, maybe you got like an ulcer or something like that. And doctor's like, nothing wrong with you, man, you're okay. Are you under a lot of stress? And I'm like, no, everything's kind of the same way it is. We're being successful, we're arresting people, we're recovering a lot of girls. And he goes, well, what do you mean recovering girls? I go, well, we go on Backpage and we find these juveniles and we pull them out. And he goes, well, how do you do that? And I told him about it, and he goes, so you're looking at naked pictures of girls that you find out later are kids? And I go, yeah. He goes, you haven't figured out that that's probably what you're upset about? That that's why your stomach's all in knots? And that's the biggest reason why that group sort of launched in the way that it did, because I needed a place to be able to talk to other people, because I realized, like many other people have realized and women have been telling us for a long time, guys don't belong there. Guys don't belong on Backpage. There's a young woman, she's not young, she's my age, but women at my age are young. Sorry about that. That was a slip. Please, Terry, please don't tell my wife I said that. Her name's Nita, and they were at the Super Bowl in Houston. She runs a nonprofit out of Oregon. Great lady. Wrote a book called In Our Backyard. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Okay. They do a thing where, did you meet her when you were out there too? Okay. So I apologize for pointing at you, dude. Sorry about that. But so they ran a thing where they would actually go on Backpage and they would look for things, and part of that group is men that are on there actually looking at it. And that was one of my only criticisms, because as much as sometimes we have to do it, I don't want guys walking into that place of temptation. I mean, we are wired a certain way naturally, and that natural wiring has been so disturbed and rewired and destroyed by the way that the world has approached our sexuality, that I don't want to throw anybody into that place where they're out there looking at these photos again. And it's so critical when you think about protecting us. There are people, we need people on Backpage looking at those pictures and trying to decide if that's a kid, or if there's bruises, or if there's indications of drug use, because oftentimes we'll find track marks. And when you see multiple pictures over a period of time, because they always hold the phone up, right? They always do the selfie like this. And some days the track marks are on the right arm, and some days the track marks are on the left arm. Some days there's bruising. Some days you can tell that they just didn't do a very good job of covering up the bruises. So somebody needs to be out there looking for it. I just don't think it's guys. I don't think it's men. I think that the biggest single thing we can do to preserve and protect our families is to keep guys out of the places where we know that temptation is going to occur. You guys really can't read this. This is really, really creepy and very important for me to tell you guys. So what's the top search term internationally for pornography? Does anybody know? Stepmom. No kidding. Barna study. 2016, top search term in porn was stepmom. A few down from that, stepsister. If that doesn't shake people at their core about what people are thinking about when they go on there, that's not the only term they're searching for. And Terry, you are giving me the exact perfect look that Melanie gave me when I told her that yesterday when I was preparing that slide, and I pulled out and I go, hey, do you know what the big top search term was? And she gave me that look. And I'm like, I didn't search it, but that's what the research told us. That's a shocking revelation, isn't it? About the incredible depravity that's associated with stepping into this world. Let me tell you a little bit about this world. State versus Thomas Campbell. So this is one of those times where I really thought I was going to get beat up by somebody that I didn't know. Okay, and I've been beat up a bunch of times. Most of the time it's by people that I'm arresting, but this guy, so what happens is one day our secretary goes, hey, can you come out to the front? And I'm sure, what's up? There's a big guy out here, he seems really mad, and he asked for you. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very good. I mean, I don't do anything bad, so I thought maybe, what I thought was like a guy that got out of jail or something like that, and he was coming to get a little payback. But, so I go out there, and it is a big guy. I mean, he's like 6'5" and, 280 pounds of solid muscle and whatnot, and he's just, you could tell he's just ready to tear a phone book in two. And he hands me an iPod, or one of those little iPod things, not the phone, but yeah, it's an iPod. Hands it to me and goes, here, you need to take a look at this. And I'm like, yes, sir, I'll take a look at that. Words with Friends. Anybody here play Words with Friends? Know what it is? It's a game, right? It's a kid's game, too. I mean, kids play it. So in the interest of making sure that his daughter did a good job, would very selective about what games she could play. Hey, word games, spelling games. That makes a lot of sense. I would have thought that. So she's on there, and he says, and she makes, he goes, I didn't know that kids could chat with other people, but apparently they can. So she's chatting with this kid, says he's 17 years old, but something's weird here, I don't like it. And I looked at the chat, and I said, well, there's nothing, yeah, I get you, it's creepy. There's something weird here. He's asking questions that just don't seem right, but there's nothing illegal here. He hasn't crossed the line, hasn't asked what she, there's nothing sexual or anything, but he just seems a little too interested in a girl that said that she's 10 years old. That just doesn't sit right with me, right? So I said, yeah, let me take a look at it. So I took it over, took the iPad, got her credentials, went home, downloaded Words with Friends, brushed up on my spelling, and then I went into this chat and directed him over to one of our software systems and said, hey, text me at this number because my dad took my iPod away, which actually was true. So I was able to not lie about it. Cops that work undercover and do this kind of stuff, one of the constant things we always deal with is measuring deception, because at some point, and I know that most people in here would give me a free pass to catch bad guys to lie, right? At some point, the reality of it is when you lie to people all the time, it really does affect you. I mean, it is not without its costs. One of the things I can't wait for is to retire and not lie to people anymore. I mean, in other parts of my life, I'm like overly honest, right? And stuff like that, because I'm just trying to distance myself so much. Anyways, that's an off-topic thing. But, so I start texting with this guy, and within a very short period of time, he is asking me questions, so I didn't include those, asking me questions like, hey, what do you sleep in? What do you look like? Do you sleep in jammies? Really kind of stepping around the issue. I knew where this was going at this point, but I still didn't know who this guy was. So then I said, what's your name? And he said, Tom. Well, then when I got the return back from the IP that he was bouncing off of, because he was using a Google Voice thing, and Google Voice forwards to a real phone, and I got the phone and I got the IP address, and it came back to this guy. Well, he wasn't a 17-year-old kid. He's a 50-something-year-old guy that lived in Prairie. And so I kept this chat going, and within about 3 hours of me starting that initial chat, he was talking about his penis, and he was saying, have you ever seen one? And I said, no, I've never seen one. He goes, but you'd like to, right? Not, would you like to? But you'd like to. And I said, well, I don't know. I guess I might be ready. So you're asking me to send you a picture of mine? That's how leading, I mean, I could teach a whole class on working these guys just from that text alone because of how leading he was in everything. And if I'd been a 10-year-old girl, how effective of a strategy would that have been with her? Because she'd be like, yeah, I guess I do, right? And so then, of course, he started sending me naked pictures, which I'm going to spare you seeing. I'm not going to show those to you. But he started saying, yep, you're welcome. And he started sending those sorts of things and asking for pictures from me. So, and I apologize for anybody that flies Delta. This guy was the manager, cook guy that prepared all the meals for Delta First Class. And I fly Delta First Class occasionally when I get to, because I get upgraded. And so I probably have eaten. So we went out and arrested him right out at the airport, and that's how that worked out. But the reason why that's so important is that wasn't on a pornographic website. He had penetrated the world that we send our kids into, and this guy, who would have torn him in half if I'd been able to, because he asked me, hey, seriously, will you just tell me who he is? Nate, I can't do that. His name's Nate. Dude, seriously? I can't do that. No, seriously, really. I promise I won't tell anybody. And I don't think he would have told anybody. But I couldn't allow that to happen. So I went through and I pulled out a bunch of things that I've used previously that I think are really a good summary, and I'm going to try and go through these kind of quick. There's a whole bunch of different ways that people look at pornography. These are all research sites, and it's good. I didn't give you crappy research. These are good scholarly statistics reported on websites that are well done, and it's proven. So this is good stuff. Toxic effects real quickly. Creates emotional bond with artificial world, sex without intimacy, unsatisfying, all the way on down. The one I'm most interested in right here, the one that I see time and time and time again, is the one that says escalation. Like drug use, like domestic violence, like power, like greed, like lust. Porn is never, ever satisfied with fulfilling an appetite up to a point. It always, always, always seeks more. And what else is like that? Addictions, right? And as much as I resisted that label, the more I read about this, the more experience I have with this, the more men I talk to that wrestle with this every single day, the more I recognize that we do walk around with addictive-like behaviors, that even though I've never considered myself an addict, even though they've never considered themselves an addict, many of the things that we do look like that. Biochemical. So there's this biochemical line of research where people look at this, and these are all secular, okay? Rapidly changing motifs and visuals mirror a methamphetamine type experience. The fact that it goes like this. It's happening so fast. You go to one site and then, or one video, and then you go to the next video, and you go to the next video, and it doesn't happen like a normal sexual experience, right? But that's where you trick your body, because what's the big reason why people use pornography? Masturbation, right? So there is a component of sexual physiology that's involved here without sex. You effectively recreate a portion of the sexual act without a true sexual act. The problem with that is what it does to your brain. When neurons fire in pairs, they start to co-associate. And when you start to connect things biochemically, they start to form a dependency for each other. And this is why you now have these syndromes where doctors are seeing kids that are 18, 19, 20 years old and cannot get an erection in a normal sexual relationship because their brain has been rewired to expect what? To expect a certain escalation that happens over a very short period of time, involves a lot of different people, and accelerates from the point of no arousal to extreme arousal very quickly. And that's the big biochemical danger about this. The secrecy of internet pornography, I thought that was super interesting, creates an adrenal stimulation that is attainable only through forbidden sexual experiences. My wife, her big snack is Ghirardelli milk chocolate chips. I couldn't sleep last night. I ate the whole freaking bag. And then I hid it in the bottom of the trash can. Because I didn't want her to know. Problem was, I left the dog out when I went to bed. And the dog tore the trash, and so she was mad about that. And then she was mad that first she thought the dog ate her Ghirardelli chocolate chips. And I could not, I'm not going to bear false witness. I've read the 10 Commandments. I accepted responsibility. I took the load off the dog. I took one for the team and admitted that I did it. My point was, and I'm not trying to make fun of it, but my point was is there was a moment that I felt, well, first of all, I felt like I was going to get away with it, but I felt really sneaky, and it was, you guys have all been there, right? You do something sneaky and you feel like, most of us do sneaky things that really aren't bad. But that's really interesting to me, that we learn to co-associate the secret and forbidden with a new level of arousal. And the other thing is that intensity of the drive. And when I talk to guys that I arrest, Do you know why they tell me that they moved from pornography to the strip clubs to Backpage and to actual physical? Do you know why they tell me that they did that? Because at some point, porn no longer gave them arousal. They'd tried it, it worked great for a while, and then it stopped working. And so they needed something else. So then they went to the physical at the strip club. Did you guys see that health department report that came out? Did that surprise anybody? I mean, you guys all probably figured that, right? Do you know how long I've been waiting for that report to be made public? I knew those findings back a while ago, and I'm like, you guys got to put that out there. Yes, ma'am.
When is that report?
That 11 of the 17 clubs and strip clubs in downtown Minneapolis had evidence of male semen in them. And now, that's not a gigantic surprise. It's really, really disgusting. And the reality of it is that's not for any of us that have worked UC any of those clubs or have worked in that world. That's not a big surprise. We knew that stuff was going on, but for a long time, we were kind of told, hey, conventioneer business, got to stay away from them. So I'm not here as a representative of the city of Minneapolis or the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm here as a warrior of what I need to make sure you guys know, and that's why I'm going to tell you all that stuff, okay? You'll see that it doesn't identify me as Grant Snyder, Minneapolis Police Sergeant up here anywhere. I just want to be clear about that. Not because I don't want to show up on Monday. Well, actually, I'm taking Monday off, so they can do whatever they want to me Monday. Addiction phase. We talked about addiction. Here's another way people look at it, right? The early exposure. The addiction process. That early exposure at a young age, which is generally, in many cases, accidental and benign, but not always, because kids talk a lot about that. The addiction forms, there's an escalation process, and then what happens? Once you're addicted and you escalate to more frequent use, more variety, okay, and these sites are set up to do just that, to draw you in, you get desensitized to it. And it's not just to the porn, you get desensitized to anything else that approximates a normal sexual relationship, which is why many of these guys that start reaching out for pornography because their sexual relationship, their intimate relationship with their wife really isn't going where they want it to go, it's not satisfying, they do the very thing that's going to kill what they do have. Because now all of a sudden, that drive, that desire, that attraction that was once there is now deadened because they've been able to train their body and their biochemistry and their physiological response, their arousal response to something else. And that's when they start acting out sexually. Has anybody heard of the Coolidge effect? You guys know what this is? If you get a chance, Google it, because it is an interesting story. Calvin Coolidge was apparently at some sort of a chicken farm, made some comment to his wife or somebody about the rooster or something like that, and that's where it came from. But it's basically a phenomenon that's been studied and studied and studied, and it's based on mammal sexuality, maybe connected to men. I say maybe because I know it's connected, but I don't think there's a study that says, yes, it's absolutely the reason why we can prove this happens. Basically, it demonstrates empirically that there is a condition in which sexual interest is renewed with introduction of a new partner when even sexual activity with a previous partner has diminished or ceased altogether. And that's just basically a way of saying at some point when that sexual relationship sort of matures, like in a marriage, right? What happens? Frequency generally goes down. Sometimes sexual activity stops altogether, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that happens. But the Coolidge effect, and this is where Satan tricks us, because he sends in somebody else or puts us in a position where now we're going to be tempted, and that sexual arousal returns. And so what does that guy think? He goes, you know what? I'm not attracted to my wife anymore. I'm attracted to her. And that's not at all what's happening here. It's a novel sort of introduction, and it's very based in physiology and has nothing to do with a lack of attraction to your wife, right? It has to do with our physiology and how our bodies are wired. And that's why that's such an important, interesting thing to talk about. All right, pornography and sexual aggression. This is really going to be interesting. If you guys really want to get your minds around what pornography is all about, read these studies that connect these two. And there's a book. It's called Pornography and Sexual Aggression. It's by that guy. He's the editor. All the people that write in it are scholars. Many of them are not on the side that pornography, when they started doing this study, they were not in favor of supporting a pornography leads to sexual aggression against women. But in fact, what they found in these studies that were done between 1980 and 2014, The pornography was associated with male to female aggression, but not male to male or female to female aggression. And they had to do all those studies to make sure that this just wasn't an artifact that you get aggressive with everybody. No, it was a very specific type of aggression that was directed from men to women, and it was around situations that were mildly or could look like they were potentially sexual. And that's a really, really important finding. And here's the problem. Knowing this stuff, why would you ever want to introduce that back into your head? Why would you want to open your mind and your body and your biochemistry and all that programming that we really don't understand to that kind of an influence? This was another good study, I thought. Pornography as revolution against morality displays an obvious hatred of traditional Christian morality, i.e. moral restraint is bondage. Okay? Look what porn attacks. It attacks our marriages. It attacks this idea of self-control. It attacks monogamy. Proposes that morality in fact is tedious, that it's confining and restrictive, that if you really want to be liberated, you go after the things that are forbidden, which is another word for what? Sin. It's evil, right? And we go after that. Proposes that porn mirrors the demonic. So there was a really sort of creepy case that I did about 2 years ago that was tied in, and we were never able to find the guy that was the suspect in this thing. But all of the porn so he would get videos, it was targeting underage girls, and it was run off the dark web. He was targeting underage girls, and then on the dark web, he would get their videos that they would send him, like masturbation videos and everything like that. And then he would dress up in like a ram's head and stuff, very satanic type stuff. And he would do these overlays of various scenes from, like The Exorcist and The Exorcism of Emily Rose and some of all these other things. This was absolutely one of the creepiest cases I ever worked in. There were times when I was working this case that I'm like, I feel really vulnerable here. And so I had to spend a lot of time with my mentor and with my pastor and things like that because it was so creepy. But one of the things that guys will report to you, if they trust you and you start having these conversations, men that have used porn and will admit that they've used porn, talk about the faces that they see in the aftermath of that. I can't get those images out of my head. And I'm like, well, what do those images look like to you? And they'll be like, they look like evil. They look evil to me. And there is a very strong component of demonic activity in pornography. And I'm not a guy that sees demons behind every tree. That's not my thing. I'm not like that. But it is important to call evil what's evil, and that's what I'm just trying to do here. And then lies abound. Life is found in the experience of the forbidden practice of sin and the excesses therein. It's hostile to law and morality, seeks moral anarchism, and morality is death. And it goes back to, I'd recommend that you guys check this book out, buy it online. The ebook's like $13. It's actually really inexpensive. And it's a really, really good book. There's a lot of really good research that's done in there. And they did a nice job. Okay.
What was that last fact on there about?
Research demonstrates that people commit adultery not because of the desire for the other person, but because they don't want to miss out on life. That's what they said. I'm not going to argue for it because I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I can see both sides of that because I've talked to and mentored a lot of guys that have been in, kind of on the fringes of an adultery relationship, and I can kind of see what they're talking about. But it's well done research. They did a good job with this, and these are based on self-reports, which there's issues with, but it's interesting stuff. The Power of Four. This is another good website I encourage you to do. The Power of Four, it's a study, and they pulled together all these different Gallup polls and all kinds of stuff. The extensive nature of this sample was just startling. Christians who are engaged in Scripture most days of the week have lower odds of participating in all of those things. And that's what they call the Power of Four, because the Power of 4 days. And so their challenge, they call it the Bible challenge, was to engage Scripture 4 days a week. Because then you're over that more, not less thing, right? And that's what that study showed. And I had never seen this until about 3 weeks ago. And we talked about this in our purity group. And actually, one of the assignments, because we do little assignments and stuff like that, was we set up, we have done memory verses in the past, but it felt, some of these guys know the Bible way better than I do, and so I felt like I was the one that was benefiting from it and not them. But we went back to this. We said, okay, so here's the deal. We're going to do a log, and it's going to be a shared log. I'm going to write on your log this week. Next week, it's going to him. And so everybody's going to kind of know, and we're going to benefit off each other. And the guys, after just a couple weeks, really reported that the people that were doing that 4-day engagement, and some of them were doing it anyway, but they were actually logging it and reflecting on it, they said that their factors, their involvement in pornography and lust and all these other things like that went way down, that they spent so much time that it was easy to reflect about. Now, here's the other cool thing I'm going to show you guys about this, if I can figure out where it is. Can I borrow your card there, sir? And promise I'll get back to you. So one of the guys, and this last week we had a very unfortunate thing happen in our purity group. There was a guy that died, and he was a man that had been caught in a sting, not my sting, but he had been caught in a sting and had really kind of fallen on tough times after that, lost his family, lost his wife, lost his job. His parents won't talk to him, his brother won't talk to him and things, and this was a few years ago. And so, we became friends. I was speaking last year, whatever it was, at Bethlehem, and he came up to me after and said, hey, I don't want to talk to you, because I did tell him I was a cop. And he goes, I don't want to talk to you, but God's telling me I have to talk to you. And so I'm like, okay, well, what's up? And then we talked, and we actually became really close. And he would call me, and I would call him, and he'd send me text messages. And that's another thing for those of you that are not involved in purity groups or not involved in those sort of men's ministries. That thing about being able to pick this up and text guys at 1 o'clock in the morning, go, hey, I'm struggling, can you guys pray for me? It's like you're wrapping yourself. It's just like having somebody there that puts their hand on your shoulder, and says, hey, it's okay. I'm going to pray for you. Be strong. You want me to talk to you on the phone and stuff like that? Well, that's what he would do. We would do that for each other. So one of the guys he brought in was a guy that I arrested and showed up, recognized him, wasn't sure it was really him, and it was like this weird moment when all of a sudden a guy that I arrested on a guardian angel posing as a kid walked through the door. And he's a great guy. And because of that, his whole entire life has changed. I had lunch with him yesterday, and we met again today because we were talking about it. I was telling him I was going to do this. And he goes, I just want to tell guys what could happen if they do what I did. Because he told me that day when we arrested him in that hotel room, and I was sitting on the end of the bed, sitting here, and he was sitting here, and I felt like I had to just tell this guy, you know what? I know this is going to be rough. I'm going to go through it. I've had a guy kill himself before. The first guy we ever arrested in Guardian Angels killed himself the day after he was charged. And so I'm talking to this guy, and he said, you don't understand. I'm going to lose everything. And he did. He literally lost everything. And so for him to be able to share with us things that he's gotten, and what he does is he takes a card like this, and he writes on one side whatever that thing he's wrestling with, pornography, lust, looking at women on the street, or imagining himself in sexual interactions with women and stuff. And then on the backside he writes, what'll happen if I do that? Well, I'll feel bad. I'll feel like I've sinned, and I'll have to go before God and basically confess. This could happen. I might get my parole revoked if I actually went through with it, and all these other things like that. And he told us about that. And so back a couple weeks ago when I was on actually it's been about a month, I was on the Arizona Trail, I wrote down on a card, I wrote down some of that stuff and carried them out there. And it's really, really powerful. So if you're a guy out here today that's looking for some support, well, number one, I cannot tell you the feeling, as iron sharpens iron, so man sharpens man, right? Is that how it goes? I can't remember, Keith. I apologize. I'm always looking at you to Keith's one of my mentors. He's the guy I turn to. But the point is that I can't tell you how important those sorts of things are that we learn from other people. And this is right from the lips of a guy who's so raw out of this reality. And I just feel so fortunate to have walked this walk with him since I was the guy that put cuffs on him. And he has not one time asked for me to apologize to him or tried to put it on me. He fully owns that. And we become just best friends. It's just really this incredible thing. But I would really encourage you guys to think about doing that. Thank you for letting me borrow that. So, talked about the Word of God. We talked about the power of 4. Okay? Here's a couple of verses that I really love. and I just want to share with you guys. Because we know that the Word of God is powerful. We know that, as Jesus tells us, that we can't do this without Him. And we know that the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, and it penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. And for anybody that's really penetrated the Bible, really dug into Scripture, at those times when you're feeling bad, those are the best times to really dig in, because you feel such a power in my own life. Those are the times when I am going to learn the most, and that's why I want to make sure that we are always taking the route right back to Scripture. James 1:21 tells us the same thing. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. There is a promise around what the Word of God will do to us. God understands and understood when He was providing this revelation. And when the Bible was being written, He understood what we were going to be faced with. He understood the power of that word to combat the filthiness and the disease of the world in which we live. And then Isaiah, which still continues to be one of my favorite books, Isaiah 55, I would encourage you to read both Isaiah 55, 56, and 57. So my word that comes from my mouth will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I please and will prosper in what I send it to do. That promise that the word is actually going to make an impact on people who hear it. It will not return back without having an impact. And likewise, I wanted to include this in 57 because I just love this image here. This is where he's talking about his judgment. Isn't it you rebellious children, you race of liars, who burn with lust among the oaks, under every green tree, when you cry out, let your collection of idols deliver you. The wind will carry all of them off, a breath will take them away, but whoever takes refuge in me will inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. The reason I love that verse so much is because that's God very clearly saying, if you put your hope, if you continue to be rebellious and you pursue those idols, which is what pornography is, it's an idol that we erect that stands between us and God, that eclipses our sight of God, that idol will never save us. That the wind that destroys that idol will destroy us along with it. And it's so important for us to seek refuge. And those are just a couple of examples about the sort of change, that experience that the Word offers to us. Does pornography cause the depraved mind, or does the depraved mind seek pornography? And there's a really great article about this, but I decided not to use it because I wanted to use the actual Romans 1 verses where Paul is talking very specifically to this issue. And he says, for though they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became nonsense, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of immoral God for images, and you guys know the rest. Okay? That tells me what they're trying to say is that depravity, that sin, that lust that we carry around with us causes us to become more lost. And we're in that place of being lost. We're in that place of seeking things that we have been lied to, that we think are going to create life. In fact, they don't create life, and we erect these idols. Therefore, God delivered them over to the cravings of their heart, to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And this is the verse that you talked about yesterday, Terry. And do you remember you quoted this? You said, see, you're just like this well of wisdom, and you don't even remember when you do it. But we were sitting there, and Terry talked about that. She said, yeah, that God gives people over at some point when we continue to pursue rebellion, when we continue to pursue things we know are evil. At some point, God gives us over to our desires. And He does that out of what? Out of love, because He knows that the best way to discipline a child is to watch that kid fall sometimes. And I got a 19-year-old kid right now that keeps falling down. It's tough to watch happen. Can you imagine what it must be like for God? and he gets to watch us do it over and over and over and over again. But thank you, Terry, for bringing that up yesterday, because that really kind of made me think about that a lot. And I find a lot of hope in that. I find a lot of hope to know that the Word of God has just such wisdom about all these things that we're going to face. This is the part here, so we got about 20 minutes. I'm going to bump over all this. Here's the Barnum study, and they made 10 really important findings. I covered 8, but I'm going to go over that. You guys are welcome to this. Or I said Barnum. Barna Group. You can actually go on there and download the study now. I think it used to be the whole study's like $35. I found it for free on a PDF. I don't know. But anyways, it's out there. But I'm going to go over it real quickly. Moral ambiguity towards porn was 1. Varied it about what creates porn. 1 in 3 Americans seek out porn at least once a month. Okay? I think that's very, very low, again, based on self-report. I think it's higher than that. Age, gender, and faith practice impact how frequent people use porn. And I'm sorry you can't read these, guys. I didn't know it was going to be that hard to read.
Can you go back to the faith practice one?
Yep.
Is there, we can't read it. Can you just
Yeah.
give us the top one?
So it says 78%. Boy, that is really difficult to read. I'm sorry, I'll read it on here. 72% males not practicing Christians between the age of 13 and 24 report that's a factor in their frequent porn use. When you get down to Christians, it is males practicing Christians between the ages of 13 and 24. 41% report frequent porn use. Now here's what challenged me a little bit about the Barna study. That kind of is a underestimate, I think, because other studies have reported that over half of men that attend church at least once a month use porn at least weekly. And that, to me, is frequent pornography use. I don't know what their criteria was in this study, but it's an interesting finding. And the connection between that. But it does demonstrate the protective factor of that. I'm going to bump through these, you guys, and get down to a couple other things. I'm sorry. If it'll let me go. There we go. All right. I want to talk about a couple case studies that relate to this. So this guy, I arrested in Lakeville, right here off 35. There's a truck stop right down here by McDonald's, right? So, what's that?
That is correct.
Is it close by? So, back in November, I got a call from our Fusion Center, and they said, hey, there's a guy that posted an ad, and it's pretty creepy. You should read it. So I read it, and a St. Thomas college student was looking for a place to stay, and she found this ad and sent it to me. And it says, desperate, need a place to stay tonight. Homeless, had a fight with your parents or boyfriend. And that's a guy that's looking for homeless and runaway kids, people that are desperate, right? And he included his phone number, so I found out it's not a guy named Jeff, it's a guy named Raymond, and he's a level 3 registered sex offender, lived in North Minneapolis, 2 previous kidnap and sexual assault of 13-year-old girls at knife point. So I'm like, yep, I guess I'm working today. And so put eyes on the guy, went up on his phone, so because we were really concerned about who he would have contact with. So we set people on his house. His car was there. We tracked his vehicle. And I started texting him. And within minutes after I sent the first text, he's like, how old are you? He wanted to know. And I said, I'm 15. Where are you? Do you need my help? You know, that's what he went to. And then we continued to text. And we exchanged about 450 text messages over a 3-day period of time, during which he escalated his aggression. He demanded naked pictures of me, demanded that I get in bed and do certain things, sent me pictures of him and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, you could see the sex offender in him really starting to come out. So 3 days later, that's Apple Valley Police Sergeant Sean McKnight putting handcuffs on him right there. And you can see the open door panel on his vehicle. In the door panel, he had a steak knife, same type of knife that he used on those 2 previous kidnap and sexual assaults. So there's no question what he was going to do. So there's 2 really creepy things I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to move on. First one, when I put him, because he asked, wanted to know what it was about, so I came over. He was in handcuffs. He's sitting inside the back of the squad. So I was closing the door. He said, you know what? I said, what? And he goes, you should have left me alone. If you thought I was violent before, just wait till you see what I'm like when I get out now. All that was recorded, thankfully, because that played into his sentencing and his civil commit. And then the other thing was, when we interviewed him, he didn't give me a whole lot of information. He was very coy about it. So I did the deal where, I started talking to him. I'm like, Raymond, okay, interview's over. But I just want to tell you, I get it. I understand. He goes, well, what do you mean? I go, dude, I'm a guy too. I understand. Okay, I know. Girls these days, they don't look like girls did when we were growing up, because he is basically my age. I think he was like 2 years younger than me. And so we started having this conversation, and I started talking about young women and how they dress, and I knew underwear was a big thing for him because he'd been talking to me about my underwear. Not my personal underwear, but the 15-year-old underwear. So otherwise I wouldn't have been able to arrest him. But as I started going through, the colors of underwear and just trying to get this guy, because I needed to show on that video that was being shot what this guy really was. And he started stomping his foot, and he's wringing his hands, and he's sweating, and he's shaking and everything. I mean, just the visceral reaction that he had to that line of questioning was really, really shocking. And he's one of the few people that I've ever had to do that with, to sort of pull him into his real identity around this stuff. But it was really super effective. But it was creepy nonetheless. There it is. Oh, okay, no, this isn't him. This is actually from a couple days ago. This is on the gangbang ad. How old are you? I like young hotties. Send a pic of yourself. I'll get the boys ready. Okay, there's a whole bunch of other ones I could have put on, but I don't want to, have bad language and stuff like that in here, really. And so that's why I kept them out. But this is from a guy that we arrested 2 days later. I arrested him yesterday at the Hotel Minneapolis. He showed up with 5 other guys, 2 more than he was going to bring, okay, but they all showed up there. They brought no money with them. What do you think was going to happen? They had video cameras. They had from the way that it looked to me, something that like a Velcro strap that you would use to bind somebody. Okay. That was, and these guys had never been arrested before. That's who we hunt out there. That's who lurks out there. And one of the guys talked to me, the other ones didn't. But the one guy that talked to me, I'm like, do you guys do this a lot? Well, yeah, we've done it like 3 or 4 times. It's really fun, And he knew I was 15 years old. The guy that I had communicated with, who was not the guy I talked to. But the guy said, yeah, he told us you were 15. And I'm like, that didn't upset you, turn you off, drive you the other direction? I mean... What's that?
How old were they?
So the oldest was 38, and the youngest was 24. And they all lived in the southern suburbs, not here, but to the west a little bit. But that's the kind of people that we're getting on these. And the age of the guys that want to do that group stuff is a little younger than the other. We haven't done enough of it for me to really make a firm declaration about that. I can't tell. Okay, this is from a woman who worked in the porn industry, and I just included because I thought this was an interesting quote. I can't tell you how many porn addicts have lost their families and jobs. It's really sad, and they're contributing to children being raped. I'm like, for a better reason not to click porn, think about child porn. Just think right now. I've been talking to you, there are little kids, little children that are being drugged and raped. How can anyone click on porn knowing that? And that is one of the most effective things that I've found to really communicate, and it's hard when you're sitting at work. Believe me, I know. I mean, the police department, they took a picture of my DL photo and superimposed it over a stripper's body and stuck it all over the office the other day, and stuff like, she was wearing a bikini and stuff. Yeah, I know, it's funny. I mean, you can laugh about that. But that's the kind, so that it's not an environment that's really tends to be very open and informed and enlightened, but it's so important that whatever we're confronted with, we have those conversations, because otherwise, like that guy arrested in Woodbury, they don't get it. They don't know. They think that that's somebody who agreed to do this, and it's really not all that bad. And until we start to rip back that veneer so we know what it looks like, we're not going to get anywhere with it. A lot of people think that pornography fuels sex trafficking, and it does because it is sex trafficking. It's called a cutthroat business because it's trafficking. All of us have been coerced into doing a scene that we didn't want to do. That young woman in her 30s that lives in Seattle told me that same thing. She talked about all the times that she was forced to do stuff. I want to bump ahead to that, this case. Catfishing. You guys know what it is? Yeah. There's some of you who've seen this already. I apologize for the review. Sorry about that. So catfishing. Catfish is where you pretend you're somebody you're not, right? You put fake stuff out there. So this is a referral from Breaking Free that I got, and they called me and said, hey, there's a 24-year-old woman and she's being forced to do pornography. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do those kind of cases really. Why don't we call somebody else? And they're like, well, please, because we trust you. Will you please come and talk to her? Because nobody else will help her. And so I did. And she's a young lady. She grew up in the Black Hills, and she told me, hey, about a year ago, I got a friend request from one on Facebook. Her name is Bailey Ray. And I didn't know Bailey Ray, and I never met her before. We didn't have any friends in common, but she liked motorcycles, and I like motorcycles, and so I accepted this friend request. And she said we became really, really close really quick. I said, okay, did you ever talk to her? No, we just talked on Facebook Messenger. It was all done over smartphone. Everything was all done on like the Facebook version of text, right? And at one point during the relationship, early on, Bailey Ray sends her a picture of her in bra and underwear and says, hey, I think this makes me look fat. And Audrey goes, no, you're so beautiful. And Bailey Ray's like, oh, you're so sweet. Now send me a picture of you. And Audrey's like, well, that's really weird. I don't want to do that. That feels creepy. But Bailey Ray kept on her, and she was her friend. So she eventually sent a picture of her in her bra and underwear. And this would continue, and it'd be more pictures, and eventually the pictures became nude. But it's her best friend, right? Not a big deal. Well, what I should tell you about this young woman is at that time she was also on Backpage, because she was a young woman like many of the women that are out there that are in the life who was solely responsible for her two elementary age children, trying to pay rent, trying to put food on the table, had lost her job, okay, and stuff like that, and she didn't know what else to do, so she put that on Backpage. Not a great idea, but you know, it's what she chose to do. So she's getting really close to Bailey Ray, and she says one day, I got to tell her. And so she sends her the message, and she says, hey, I got to admit something to you. Just so you know, I'm in the life, I'm on Backpage. And Bailey Ray doesn't reject her. Bailey Ray, as a matter of fact, tells her, that's hot. I think that's really cool. And so she's like, oh, good, she didn't reject me. And she says, tell you what, send me a video of you with one of the guys. And she's like, why would I do that? Well, eventually, my victim, she agrees to do it because they're friends and she keeps on her. So she sends her a 30-second clip of her performing oral sex on someone. And everything changes. The next day, she gets a friend request from that guy. And he says, hey, I saw your video. It's really hot. Send me more. And of course, she freaks out. She doesn't know why he's got her video. And so she contacts Bailey Ray on Facebook. And she says, hey, did you give this guy my video? Why would you do that? And she goes, no, don't mess with this guy. He'll ruin your life. He's dangerous. So she goes back to him, unblocks him, sends him a message, hey, just delete my video. That was not intended for you. Just leave me alone. And he says, I'm not going to leave you alone. As a matter of fact, you're going to have to send me more videos. And if you don't do it, I'm going to take it. I'm going to send it to these people. And he sends her a picture of her friends list that include like people at her daughter's school and her aunt and uncle and those sorts of things. So eventually she acquiesces. Mic's off. There it is, back. Eventually she gives in and she does it. She sends him another video and then another video and then another video, and this is what's going on. And he keeps kind of taunting her and saying, hey, you better do this next time. You better do this next time. At one point he tells her he put it on the internet and all this other kind of stuff. Well, one day, and all this time she's kind of fighting with, this has got some language in it, guys, for parents here. I apologize, and now it's stuck on that screen, so hopefully you can't read it. Anyways, I apologize for that. But at one point he says, here, if you want me out of your life, here's me out of your life. You're going to go to the Minneapolis hotel. You're going to meet with these guys there. 4 guys you're going to have sex with, and a 5th guy's going to film it, and then they're going to pay you $500. And then I'll be out of your life. And she doesn't want to do it. She resists it for a really long time, but he gets really threatening. At one point, she gets a job, and he sends a picture of her, not the video, but a clip, like a still shot to somebody at work, and that creates all kinds of issues. So she agrees, and she goes and does it. And they shoot several, like an hour and a half of video or something like that, right? Well, the next day, is Dante Maxwell out of her life? No, he's more deeply embedded than ever, and now he wants more, and she didn't do what he wanted, so now he's very angry, and he's telling her she's got to do it again and all this other kind of stuff. So that's the level of desperation when she comes into my office, and she's like, nobody's going to help me. What am I going to do? Nobody can help me. And I'm like, we can help you, but you got to be patient. And that's really hard to tell somebody that's every single day hearing from this person. She's been through this level of trauma, right? So I do a search warrant. First search warrant, or at the same time I do that, I put up what's called a pen register where I'm tracking the activity on Bailey Ray and Dante Maxwell's Facebook. And they're communicating with people via Messenger. The first thing that I realize is that they're not talking to each other, which I thought was really weird. We got any married people in the room that have Facebook? Do you guys talk to each other on Facebook if you're married? You don't? Just ignore each other? How does that work? I want to talk to you after. So, no, but my point is most of us, if we have friends and stuff like that, we talk to each other. We like each other's stuff. We make fun of each other. We send each other little messages. They weren't doing any of that, and it was just really strange. Then I got the return back, and it was 100,000 pages long. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get through all this stuff, and so I had to find fields. But what I found out in that was that they're talking to people all over, but Bailey Ray is talking to girls that are underage, and Dante Maxwell is talking to women that are single moms between the ages of 25 and 35 or whatever it was. Okay? That was the kind of demographic of how they broke this stuff up. Around the same time, I got back one of those IP address hits, and I figured out it was a group home over in West St. Paul. And I'm like, that's really interesting. So I did surveillance. I sat on the place for like 3 weeks trying to wait for one of the two of them to pop out, and they never did. A bunch of other guys came and went, but they didn't. And I'm like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Well, then my wife one day goes, hey, have you ever searched this picture on Google Images? Because I couldn't identify Bailey Ray. I couldn't identify either of them. They weren't real people from what I could tell. And I'm like, hey, who's the police detective here? You know? And she goes, no, let me do it. And well, she found out that was like posted a decade earlier with some Italian model or something like that. So whoever made that profile pulled that off the internet, and I had to act like, hey, that's really, I would have got there myself. But anyway, so yeah, that's how she kind of broke the case open. So I'm trying to get my mind around who these people really are. Well, then we figured out, because they were both talking about a guy named Matt Bress. Well, Matt Bress is a real person, and Matt Bress lived at that address over in West St. Paul. And so as soon as we figured that out, I go to her and I go, because I knew he was involved somehow. And I went to her and I said, do you know a guy named Matt Bress? And she goes, yeah. I go, how do you know him? Well, we dated one time. He was weird, so I stopped talking to him or something like that. I go, when did that happen? I don't know, it happened like a year and a half ago. So it was like 2 months before all this stuff started. So you guys figured it out. He was Bailey Ray and Dante Maxwell. Well, as soon as we figured out what was going on, we set about proving it. Now here's the thing. We were able to get him. When I recover, I started bouncing him all over the city because his big thing is he wanted to get back together with her. He wanted to meet her, okay? And that's what he wanted to do. And so we took control of that, and I took over as her and started moving him around so we could get video of him. And him, what I really needed was him logging in as both of them. That's how I had to do it. So I put a wiretap on his phone so I could read all of his text messages. And that's when I found out that how he did that whole thing at the Minneapolis hotel, he posted an ad on Craigslist as her. And then, so how malicious and insidious is that? Those guys that were in that room never had any idea that that wasn't her setting that up. They thought that she's the one who posted the ad. And it was just this really, really sick, twisted thing. And he had all these, like 9 different identities from what we could talk about. And now he sends me a letter like once a month threatening to get out and, that he's going to expose me. Or, it's this weird sort of deal. Apparently you go to jail and you become a better attorney than anybody's ever been. I'm not sure how that all works. But so anyways, in the end, we ended up getting this guy. And the last thing after he confessed that I asked him, sorry, this is freezing up. The last thing I asked him is I said, that's Matt. I said, hey, dude, I know that she's going to want to know, but tell me why you did it. And he goes, you know what? I don't know. I guess I was just bored. How do you soften that for a victim that just went through what she went through? And if you could have seen the woman, her tears, the worst part of that whole case was having to watch the video of her in that room. Because there were smiles. I knew they weren't real, but she smiled. How screwed up is that? That right there, I never thought porn was good, but that completely convinced me for the rest of my life that it was the most evil thing on the planet because of what it hid and was completely inaccessible to anybody that would have watched that. Anybody that would have seen that would have not seen the trauma. They wouldn't have seen the premeditated sexual assault that occurred repeatedly in that room. And that's exactly what was going on. There was no way to tease all that out. And that I can't get that out of my mind. But hey, guess what? I told you guys, porn sucks, right? Can you guys leave here thinking that porn sucks today? Can everybody, if you didn't walk in with that, can you walk out of this room realizing the connection between pornography and all of these horrible fingers that it has, not only just into trafficking, but in other areas of our life? Okay, so I'm going to end there. I'm done. I was just going to say, did anybody have any questions? But okay.
Hello. Question, because you've seen so many dark things in humanity and in people with some of this kind of stuff, how do you not lose hope in humanity, and how do you not just become a hermit and not want to associate with the world when you've seen some of that kind of stuff, and maybe, in other settings people may not have been exposed to certain types of things that you've seen with the work you do?
So before, and a lot, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. Before I started seminary, that was a bigger issue than it is for me right now. Now it's still, I'm still not outside of the wire, so to speak, of being impacted by that. But I feel like I have a better sense of purpose about why. And I know that this is just for a season. I know that I'm not going to keep doing this forever. And I think there was a time when I really thought that I was going to. So part of that is an acknowledgement. When I hear things and I read things in the Bible, where Jesus talks about us not being able to do anything without him, when I think about the process of sanctification. The other thing that's really made a big difference for me, frankly, is the connection I've been able to keep with a number of young women that I've recovered over the years, some of whom are married now, have their own kids, are doing really great work. One's a marine biologist out in California. And they call me, and they're like, hey, I saw your Facebook picture. It looks like you lost about 70 pounds. Are you okay? And stuff like that. I'm like, hey, it's good to hear from you too. And they're like, I just want to make sure you're not dying or something like that. I'm like, no, I'm not dying. Because I'll come back if you are. Okay, thanks. But no, so that relationship. And the other thing that really, really hurt was watching families fall apart. And guys, buyers, there's a real calling there. I don't know how it looks. All I'm doing right now is trying to mentor those guys. But you only have to hear one time a wife get a phone call from jail that's 6 hours too late because she doesn't know where her husband is, and so she's terrified, and she's so happy to hear his voice, and then he says, hey, I kind of got arrested. Well, what do you mean you got arrested? Well, I got arrested. What for? Well, prostitution, kinda. Well, what do you mean, kinda prostitution? And as that conversation goes, you can just hear her life just cracking apart. It's unlike, I can't get it out of my mind. It's really, really hard to forget that. And I've tried, but that's, I think, the biggest thing that drives me into rooms like this, so that I can have those conversations. Because anybody that struggles, I don't care if you call me in the middle of the night and go, hey, I'm on Backpage right now, I'm thinking about doing this. I'll come to where you are, and we'll have a cup of coffee, and we'll talk it over. I don't want to see any more broken families. It's so preventable. So.